The silence in the Remembrance's bridge was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of life support systems cycling through their endless routine. Captain Sarachin stood before the main display, her weather hands clasped behind her back as she studied the tactical readout, showing 3 Zolani cruisers drifting in formation around the mining station. 57 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun and scars that mapped a lifetime of battles across her dark skin, Chin embodied everything humanity had become since the war ended 23 years ago. "Distance to target?" she asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had kept her crew alive through a dozen impossible missions. 200,000 kilometers and closing, Captain," replied Lieutenant Marcus Webb from a navigation station. At 32, Webb was one of the younger crew members, born during the Exodus years when humanity fled to the Outer Rim territories. His fingers moved across holographic controls with practiced precision, adjusting their stealth approach vector. "Current heading puts us in optimal firing position in 14 minutes. Chin nodded slowly. The Zolani had been humanity's closest allies during the early years of First Contact. Their crystalline cities had welcomed human ambassadors. Their scholars had shared knowledge freely, and their military advisors had helped Earth develop its first interstellar defense networks. Right up until the moment they activated hidden kill switches in every piece of technology they had gifted, crippling humanity's fleet moments before the coordinated assault that would claim 4 billion lives. "Sensor sweep shows minimal activity," reported Chief Petty Officer Diana Reyes from her station. The 45-year-old woman's augmented eyes glowed softly blue as she processed data streams that would overwhelm unenhanced humans. 3 cruisers, standard crew complement of roughly 800 each. The mining station appears to be operating at reduced capacity. Estimate 2,000 Zolani civilians working the extraction platforms. The bridge fell silent again. Chin could feel the tension radiating from her 15-person crew, each one handpicked from among humanity's most dedicated survivors. They had been hunting together for 8 years, and in that time they had eliminated 17 enemy installations and over 30,000 of the beings responsible for Earth's destruction. "Ma'am," Webb said carefully, "preliminary scans indicate the station is processing rare Earth minerals. Intelligence suggests these materials are being used to construct memorial monuments on Zolani homeworlds. Monuments celebrating their victory over humanity." Chen's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She turned to face her crew, taking in their eager faces, their barely contained rage, their absolute loyalty to the cause that sustained them all through decades of exile and loss. Every person on this bridge had lost family during the war. Every one of them had sworn the same oath she had taken before the Admiralty 20 years ago. "Status of the quantum mines?" she asked. "Armed and ready, Captain," responded Weapons Officer Kim Nakamura. The Japanese woman's hands rested steady on her controls, no tremor betraying the devastating power at her fingertips. "Full spread will ensure complete structural collapse of both the station and escort vessels within 30 seconds of detonation. Civilian casualties? Estimated at 2,400. Chin closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her daughter's face as she had last seen it in the evacuation tunnels beneath New Geneva. 8 years old, clutching a stuffed animal while sirens wailed overhead and plasma fire lit the sky. The Zolani bombardment had reached the shelter 6 hours later. "They made their choice 23 years ago," she said aloud, opening her eyes to meet each crew member's gaze in turn. "When they decided humanity was too dangerous to exist. When they convinced 6 other species to join them in genocide. When they celebrated while our children burned." The crew nodded in unison. These words had become ritual, spoken before every engagement, a reminder why they continued their work long after the formal military structure had dissolved. "The war was just beginning," Chin continued, her voice growing stronger. "Now we hunt. Now we remind the galaxy what happens when you betray humanity's trust. Every Zolani who dies today chose their fate the moment they decided our species deserved extinction. Weapons ready, Captain," Nakamura reported. "Execute," Chin ordered. The Remembrance shuddered slightly as 12 quantum mines launched from concealed tubes along at hull. Each mine was no larger than a briefcase, but their warheads contained enough compressed antimatter to crack a small moon. On the main display, Chen watched the weapon streak toward their targets, invisible to enemy sensors until a moment of impact. Contact in 10 seconds, Nakamura announced. Chen gripped the railing in front of her, knuckles white beneath weathered skin. In a few moments, thousands more beings would die for crime of belonging to a species that had chosen genocide over coexistence. She felt no satisfaction in this knowledge, no joy in the coming destruction, but she felt no regret either. The mine struck simultaneously. On the display, 3 massive explosions blossomed in perfect silence, converting matter to energy in microsecond bursts that outshone nearby stars. The Zolani cruisers simply ceased to exist, their hulls vaporized before their crews could even register the attack. The mining station lasted slightly longer, its superstructure buckling and tearing apart as gravitational forces ripped through support beams and habitat modules. 2,400 lives ended in an instant. Chun watched it all with calm professionalism, making mental notes for her after-action report to Admiralty Command. Another successful operation. Another step toward the ultimate goal that drove humanity's scattered fleets across the galaxy. Target eliminated, Captain. Webb reported unnecessarily. Set course for rendezvous coordinates. Chen ordered. Best possible speed. As the remembrance turned away from the expanding debris field, Chun permitted herself a moment of quiet reflection. The war had indeed been just the beginning. Humanity had learned terrible lessons in those final desperate months before Earth fell. They had discovered that mercy was a luxury they could no longer afford, that trust was a weakness their enemies would exploit, and that survival sometimes demanded becoming the very monsters their opponents claimed they were. The galaxy had tried to exterminate humanity because they feared what humans might become. Now, 23 years later, they were about to discover that their worst nightmares had been conservative estimates. Admiral Helena Vasquez stood in the center of the command sphere aboard the battleship Retribution, her weather hands moving through holographic displays that showed the positions of 47 human vessels scattered across 3 star systems. At 68, she was one of the oldest surviving members of humanity's leadership, her silver hair and lined face bearing witness to battles that had raged across 1,000 worlds since the Exodus began. Status report, she commanded, her voice carrying clearly through the sphere's acoustic dampeners. 7th Fleet reports successful termination of Zolani mining operations in the Kepler 442 system, came the reply from Communications Officer Torres. Captain Chen's crew eliminated all targets with 0 friendly casualties. Total enemy killed in action, 2,400 confirmed. Vasquez nodded approvingly. Chun was one of their most reliable commanders, her crew responsible for some of their most significant victories over the past decade. The woman understood what many younger officers still struggled to accept, that this was no longer war in any traditional sense. This was extermination, pure and simple, and it demanded a different kind of thinking. Relay my commendations to Captain Chun, Vasquez ordered, and transmit new target assignments to all active hunter groups. Intelligence Division has identified 17 additional installations across former Coalition space. The Admiral moved to stand before the sphere's primary display, which showed a 3-dimensional map of local galactic space. Red dots marked confirmed enemy positions, while blue indicators tracked human fleet movements. Yellow zones indicated systems that had been cleansed, a clinical term for what the rest of the galaxy called mass murder. Vasquez had been a junior officer aboard the Defense Platform Meridian Station when the Coalition struck. She remembered watching Earth burn through the observation deck's reinforced windows, remembered a moment when humanity's trust in their alien allies transformed into something harder and infinitely more dangerous. The young lieutenant who had believed in peaceful coexistence had died that day, replaced by someone who understood that survival meant embracing the darkness that lived in every human soul. Admiral, called out Intelligence Officer Rodriguez from her station across the sphere. We're receiving priority transmission from Deep Reconnaissance Probe Echo 7. They've located something significant. On screen, the central display shifted to show a star chart marking a system roughly 40 light-years from their current position. As Rodriguez manipulated the image, it zoomed in to reveal a massive orbital structure surrounding a red dwarf star. Clearly artificial, clearly enormous, and clearly active. What am I looking at? Vasquez asked. Echo 7 identifies this as a coalition research facility, Admiral. Deep scans indicate it's been operational for approximately 15 years. Energy signatures suggest they're conducting large-scale biological experiments. Vasquez felt something cold settle in her stomach. Biological experiments on what? Unknown, ma'am. But the facility is receiving regular shipments of what appear to be human prisoners. The command sphere fell silent. Every officer present understood the implications immediately. During the final months of the war, coalition forces had taken millions of human prisoners, claiming they would be treated according to Galactic conventions. After Earth fell, those prisoners had simply vanished, presumed dead along with the rest of humanity's population. How many? Vasquez asked quietly. Conservative estimate based on transport schedules? Over 200,000 humans may have passed through that facility during the past decade and a half. Admiral Vasquez closed her eyes, feeling the familiar rage building in her chest like a physical presence. 200,000 people, men, women, children who had survived the initial attack, endured capture, and spent 15 years believing that rescue might come. While humanity's scattered fleets had focused on military targets and revenge killings, their own people had been subjected to experimentation by the very species that had orchestrated their destruction. Force composition? She asked. 3 Dreadnought-class vessels provide primary security, Rodriguez continued. Approximately 50 escort ships of various classes. Station itself appears to be heavily fortified, with defensive capabilities roughly equivalent to a star fortress. Crew estimates? Minimum of 40,000 coalition personnel. Could be significantly higher, depending on research staff size. Vasquez opened her eyes, studying the tactical display with the analytical mind that had kept her alive through 2 decades of asymmetric warfare. A frontal assault would be costly, requiring commitment of resources they could barely spare. But the alternative, leaving their own people in enemy hands, was unthinkable. Send word to all fleet commanders, she ordered. I want every available ship in this system within 72 hours. We're going to liberate that facility. Admiral, interjected Strategic Planning Officer Walsh, committing our entire fleet to a single target could compromise ongoing operations across 6 systems. Current projections suggest we could lose up to 30% of our forces in a direct assault. Vasquez turned to face the younger man, her expression carved from granite. Commander Walsh, 23 years ago, our enemies made a decision. They decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist, that our capacity for violence and innovation made us a threat to galactic stability. They were right. We are dangerous. We are innovative. And when properly motivated, we are absolutely ruthless. She gestured toward the display, showing the research facility. But we are also human, which means we do not abandon our own people to be experimented on by aliens who try to wipe us from existence, regardless of cost. Yes, ma'am. Rodriguez, I want detailed intelligence on that facility. Structural weaknesses, defensive gaps, personnel schedules, everything. Torres, begin transmitting recall orders to all hunter groups. Priority Alpha protocols. As her staff began coordinating the massive logistical operation required to assemble humanity's scattered forces, Vasquez remained focused on the display showing that distant research facility. 200,000 people. The number echoed in her mind like an accusation. Humanity had spent over 2 decades learning to become predators, developing new technologies of war, perfecting strategies of terror that would have horrified their ancestors. They had transformed themselves into exactly the monsters their enemies claimed they were, believing it necessary for survival. But somewhere in that transformation, they had lost sight of what they were supposed to be surviving for. The research facility represented more than just another target. It was a reminder of who they had been before the war changed them, who they might still be if they could find their way back. Estimated time to full fleet assembly? Vasquez asked. 68 hours, Admiral. She nodded slowly. 68 hours to prepare for what might be humanity's largest military operation since the Exodus began. 68 hours to plan an assault that could either rescue their lost people or result in the destruction of their entire remaining fleet. The war had been just the beginning, teaching humanity that mercy was weakness and trust was fatal. But perhaps it was time to remember that some things were worth risking everything to preserve. Some lines that even monsters should not cross. All stations, prepare for immediate departure. Admiral Vasquez commanded. We're going to show the galaxy what happens when humanity remembers why we fight. Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against a reinforced transparent steel window of Laboratory Complex 7, watching as another transport ship settled onto facility's primary docking platform. She had been imprisoned here for 14 years, ever since Coalition forces captured her during the evacuation of Luna Colony, and all that time, she had never stopped counting the ships that brought new prisoners to this nightmare. The facility, designated as Research Station Omega by its creators, had been constructed in the shadow of a dying red star, its massive ring-shaped structure rotating slowly to provide artificial gravity through centrifugal force. Home to nearly 300,000 humans and 40,000 alien researchers, it represented the Coalition's most ambitious attempt to understand what made their former allies so dangerously effective in combat. "Another batch arrives," murmured Dr. James Chun, joining Elena at the observation window. The 53-year-old physicist had arrived 8 years earlier, captured during a failed resistance operation on Kepler 186b. Like Elena, he bore the scars of countless medical procedures, his body marked by surgical incisions and injection sites that mapped the Coalition's relentless curiosity about human physiology. Elena nodded grimly. She estimated roughly 200 new prisoners disembarking from the transport, most appearing to be in their 20s and 30s. The Coalition preferred young, healthy specimens for their experiments, claiming that aging subjects provided insufficient data about humanity's adaptive capabilities. "Section leaders meeting tonight," James whispered. "Maintenance access Tunnel 7, after second shift rotation." "I'll be there," Elena replied. She had become the de facto leader of Laboratory Complex 7's human population, organizing covert resistance activities and maintaining morale among prisoners who had every reason to despair. It was dangerous work. Coalition security forces executed anyone caught planning rebellion, but it was the only thing that kept her human. The heavy security doors hissed open behind them, and 3 Zolani guards entered the observation lounge. The crystalline beings move with mechanical precision, their translucent bodies refracting the station's artificial lighting into rainbow patterns that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Subjects 7,832 and 12,459, one guard announced, its voice carrying the metallic overtones typical of Zolani speech. "Report to Medical Bay Theta for scheduled procedures." Elena and James exchanged a quick glance. Scheduled procedures could mean anything from routine blood draws to invasive neurosurgery, depending on what research project required human subjects that particular week. They had learned not to resist. Those who fought the guard simply disappeared, their absence explained as complications during treatment. The medical bay occupied an entire section of the laboratory complex, its sterile corridors lined with examination rooms, surgical theaters, and monitoring stations where alien scientists recorded every detail of human suffering. Elena had lost count of how many procedures she had endured over the years, how many times her body had been opened, probed, sampled, and tested in the name of coalition science. My favorite subjects," Dr. Kylis announced as they entered examination room 12. The Arcturian researcher stood nearly 3 meters tall, his 4 arms moving independently as he prepared various medical instruments. Unlike the Zolani, who had at least attempted to maintain diplomatic pretenses during first contact, the Arcturians had never hidden their belief that humanity was nothing more than an interesting biological curiosity. "Today we continue our investigation into human pain tolerance," Kylis explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Previous sessions have established baseline responses to various stimuli, but we require additional data points to complete our analysis." Elena forced herself to remain calm as restraints locked around her wrists and ankles. She had survived thousands of these sessions by divorcing her mind from her body, retreating into memories of Earth before the war. She remembered her laboratory at Cambridge University, remembered the excitement of discovery, remembered believing that science was humanity's greatest achievement. The pain began as it always did, carefully calibrated, precisely measured, methodically recorded. Dr. Kylis worked with the dedication of a scholar, inflicting suffering with the same attention to detail that Elena had once applied to her research into quantum mechanics. She screamed when the agony became unbearable, wept when her nervous system overloaded, and eventually lost consciousness when her body simply could no longer function. Hours later, she awakened in Recovery Base 7, her body numb from medical nanites that repaired tissue damage while maintaining detailed records of the healing process. James lay in the bed beside her, his face pale but alert. "Status report," she whispered. "Neural mapping session," he replied quietly. "They're still trying to understand how human creativity functions at the synaptic level." Dr. Vex seemed particularly interested in my memories of designing the warp equations that got the colony ships past Coalition blockades. Elena nodded. Every human prisoner served dual purposes: test subject and intelligence source. The Coalition scientists were obsessed with understanding how humanity had developed such effective military technologies in such a short time, how they had adapted to asymmetric warfare with such devastating efficiency. "Time until shift change?" she asked. James glanced at the wall chronometer. 40 minutes. They spent the recovery period in silence, conserving their strength for the evening's resistance meeting. These gatherings had become essential for maintaining their sanity and planning what small acts of sabotage they could manage without triggering massive retaliation. Elena had organized 17 such operations over the years, each one designed to slow Coalition research without exposing the prisoners to excessive risk. When the shift change occurred, they made their way carefully through maintenance tunnels to a storage compartment deep in the station's industrial section. 12 other section leaders waited for them, each representing different areas of the massive facility. "Report," Elena said without preamble. "Section 4 managed to contaminate 3 data cores during yesterday's upload cycle," reported Maria Santos, a former military engineer. "Should cause delays in at least 6 ongoing research projects." Section 9 successfully sabotaged waste recycling system, added Dr. Yuki Tanaka. Minor malfunction, but it forced them to reassign 26 research staff to maintenance duties. Elena listened to each report, cataloging their small victories against impossible odds. They had no weapons, no outside communication, no hope of rescue. But they refused to surrender completely, refused to become nothing more than laboratory animals waiting for the next procedure. "I've been monitoring communications traffic," Elena announced. "There's increased military activity in nearby systems. Coalition forces are consolidating their positions, pulling resources from outer territories." "What does that mean?" asked James. Elena met his eyes in the dim emergency lighting of the storage compartment. For 14 years, she had refused to allow herself hope, had forced herself to accept that humanity's scattered fleets were either destroyed or too weak to mount rescue operations. But the recent changes in Coalition behavior suggested something significant was happening. "It means someone out there is still fighting," she said quietly. "Someone is making them nervous enough to recall their fleets." The group fell silent, each prisoner wrestling with the possibility that rescue might actually come. It was a dangerous hope, the kind that could break minds that had survived years of systematic torture through careful emotional discipline. "If they come," Maria said finally, "we need to be ready to seize control of critical systems, ready to provide intelligence, ready to fight." Elena nodded. She had spent 14 years learning every detail of Research Station Omega's structure and operations. She knew the location of every security system, every weapons cache, every vulnerable point that could be exploited during a rescue operation. The Coalition had made one critical error in their research design. They had kept their human subjects alive and conscious, believing that awareness was necessary for collecting meaningful data. But consciousness meant memory, and memory meant that every person in this facility had become an expert on their captors' weaknesses. If humanity's fleets were indeed coming, the Coalition was about to discover that their greatest mistake had been underestimating their prisoners' capacity for revenge. The first sign of trouble came through the deep space monitoring arrays at 0347 hour station time. Sensor technician Vextani was conducting routine sweeps of local space when his instruments detected gravitational anomalies consistent with multiple starships dropping out of faster-than-light travel approximately 200,000 kilometers from Research Station Omega. Supervisor Kylus to Command Center immediately, Vexthani transmitted, his 4 manipulator limbs working frantically across the sensor controls. The readings made no sense. The energy signatures were all wrong for Coalition vessels, showing power curves and drive configurations that hadn't been seen for over 20 years. Dr. Kylus arrived within minutes, his towering Arcturian frame filling the doorway as he studied the tactical displays. "Explain these readings," he demanded. "Unknown vessels, sir. Configuration suggests human origin, but that's impossible. Long-range scans show at least 40 ships of various classes, all running silent until they reached our sensor perimeter." Kylus felt something cold form in his primary stomach. Human starships have been extinct for over 2 decades. Their few survivors scatter across the galaxy in tiny groups that pose no real threat to Coalition operations. The possibility that they had somehow assembled a fleet large enough to threaten the station was beyond credible strategic analysis. "Alert status?" he asked. "Station defense forces are responding," Vexthani reported. "Admiral Esakimoth has ordered all 3 dreadnoughts to launch intercept vectors. Escort squadrons are forming defensive perimeter around the station." Through the command center's primary viewports, Kylus could see the Coalition fleet moving into position. 3 massive dreadnoughts, their hulls bristling with plasma cannons and particle beam arrays, represented enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. 50 escort vessels fill the gaps between the capital ships, creating overlapping fields of fire that should make any assault suicidal. The human fleet approached steadily, making no attempt at evasion or stealth. On the tactical display, their formation looked almost primitive, simple attack wedges that any military academy student would recognize. But something about their approach triggered ancestral memories in Kylus's neural clusters, evolutionary warnings that had kept the species alive for millions of years. "Incoming transmission," Vexthani announced. On speakers, the voice that filled the command center carried the unmistakable accent of Earth's standard English, spoken with an authority that made the crystalline walls seem to vibrate with barely contained fury. "Coalition Research Station, Omega. This is Admiral Helena Vasquez, commanding the Human Liberation Fleet. You are ordered to surrender immediately and prepare to transfer all human prisoners to our custody. You have 10 minutes to comply." Kylus released what humans would recognize as derisive laughter. "Respond on all frequencies," he ordered. "Tell them we have 40,000 Coalition personnel aboard the station and defensive capabilities that can destroy their entire pathetic fleet. Suggest they withdraw immediately or face complete annihilation." The response came back within seconds, delivered in the same calm, professional tone. "Coalition forces have exactly 8 minutes remaining to begin prisoner transfers. After that time, we will interpret any delay as an act of hostility and respond accordingly." "Admiral Akimoth is requesting permission to engage," Vexthani reported. "All weapon systems are locked on target. Estimated time to complete destruction of human fleet, 14 minutes. Kylus nodded approvingly. The humans' desperate rescue attempt will provide valuable psychological data about their species' self-sacrificial tendencies. He made mental notes for the research paper he would publish about humanity's inability to conduct rational cost-benefit analyses when emotional factors were involved. "Permission granted," he told Vexthani. "Begin engagement." The Coalition dreadnought Hegemony's Pride fired first, its primary plasma cannons launching concentrated energy bursts that could crack continental plates. The beam struck the lead human vessel, a ship that sensor readings identified as the battleship Retribution, and simply disappeared into what appeared to be empty space surrounding the target. "Report," Kylus demanded. "Direct hits confirmed, sir. No visible damage to target vessel." On the tactical display, the human fleet continued its approach, seemingly unaffected by weapons that should have vaporized their ships instantly. As Kylus watched in growing confusion, return fire began to arc out from the human vessels. The weapons that struck Admiral Esakimoth's flagship defied every principle of known physics. Instead of energy beams or kinetic projectiles, they appear to be tears in space-time itself, dark wounds in reality that consume matter at the quantum level. Where they touched the Hegemony's Pride, hull plating simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly spherical cavities that exposed interior systems to hard vacuum. "How is this possible?" Kylus whispered. The battle lasted 7 minutes. In that time, 3 coalition dreadnoughts and 48 escort vessels were systematically destroyed by weapons that seemed to ignore conventional defensive systems. The human ships moved through the engagement with mechanical precision, their formation never wavering even as they unleashed forces that converted matter directly to energy. When the last coalition vessel exploded in a brief star of plasma and debris, Research Station Omega found itself completely defenseless against an enemy that had just demonstrated technological capabilities beyond anything in their strategic databases. "Station-wide alert," Kylus ordered, his voice catching with species-wide terror that evolution had programmed into every Arcturian nervous system. "All research staff to emergency positions. Security forces to defensive positions. Prepare for boarding operations." The human response came through the communication system with the same measured professionalism as before. "Coalition personnel, you have failed to comply with surrender demands. We are now implementing rescue protocols. Any interference with prisoner liberation will be met with lethal force. You have been warned." Dr. Elena Vasquez heard the announcement to the laboratory complex's internal speakers, her heart racing as she recognized a voice speaking in accented English. After 14 years of captivity, the impossible had happened. Humanity had come for its lost children. "Section leaders, implement Liberation Protocol 7. She transmitted to the prisoner communication network they had spent years establishing. "All personnel to designated positions." This is not a drill. Around her, 200,000 human prisoners began moving with coordination that surprised their captors. Years of covert planning and preparation activated in moments, as every section leader led their people toward predetermined objectives throughout the massive station. The coalition guards realized too late that their captive laboratory animals had been studying their every weakness, memorizing every security protocol, planning for exactly this moment. When the first human Marines breached the station's outer hull, they found prisoners already in control of critical systems, having seized armories and disabled defensive measures from within. Elena stood in Laboratory Complex 7's command center, watching through security monitors as power-armored humans moved through corridors with lethal efficiency. Each Marine was a walking arsenal, their weapon systems more advanced than anything she remembered from before the war. But it was their faces that struck her most powerfully, visible through their helmet visors. These were the faces of people who had learned to hate with perfect clarity, who had spent over 2 decades transforming grief into something infinitely more dangerous. The war had indeed been just the beginning. Now, as promised, humanity had come to hunt those who had betrayed them, and Elena realized with crystal clarity that her rescuers were no longer quite the same species that had been driven from Earth 23 years earlier. They had become something new, something their enemies should have feared from the very beginning. Captain Sarah Chun moved through Research Station Omega's corridors like death itself, her plasma rifle tracking potential targets with mechanical precision as her squad advanced toward Laboratory Complex 7. The station's artificial gravity felt wrong beneath her boots. Too light, too artificial, nothing like the pull of real worlds where humans were meant to live. Behind her, Sergeant Martinez provided overwatch while Corporal Kim monitored their rear approach. They had been fighting together for 12 years, long enough to move as a single organism through the sterile passages where their people had been tortured for scientific curiosity. Every door they passed, every junction they cleared, brought them closer to prisoners whose suffering had funded coalition research into human behavioral psychology. Movement ahead, Martinez reported through the squad communication system. 12 coalition personnel, mixed species, barricaded in what appears to be a medical facility. Chun raised her hand, bringing the squad to halt. Through her helmet's enhanced optics, she could see the desperate faces of alien researchers who had finally realized that their test subjects possessed friends willing to cross the galaxy seeking revenge. "Dr. Kylus," she called out, recognizing the massive Arcturian from intelligence briefings. "You have 10 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate some human behavioral patterns your research might have missed." "We are non-combatants," came the reply, transmitted to the corridor speakers, protected under Galactic conventions governing treatment of scientific personnel. Chun felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Galactic conventions. The same treaties that were supposed to have protected human prisoners of war. The same legal frameworks that had been ignored when coalition forces decided that genocide was an acceptable solution to political problems. "You had your chance," she said quietly. The plasma charges her squad fired burned to the barricade like tissue paper, converting matter to superheated gas in microsecond bursts that left nothing but empty space where solid walls had been. The alien researchers behind the improvised fortification had perhaps 3 seconds to comprehend their situation before concentrated energy beams ended their existence with clinical efficiency. Chin stepped through the smoking breach, scanning for additional threats while her squad secured the medical facility. Banks of monitoring equipment lined the walls, their displays showing biometric data from human subjects in various stages of medical procedures. She recognized the readouts from her own medical training: heart rates, neural activity, stress hormone levels, pain response curves. "Jesus," Martinez whispered, studying a surgical table still stained with human blood. "How long have they been doing this?" 15 years, Chin replied, checking her tactical display for the next objective. Long enough to perfect their techniques. They continued deeper into the station's research section, following predetermined routes that would bring them to the prisoner-holding areas. Intelligence had provided detailed schematics, but Chin found herself relying more on the crude maps transmitted by the prisoners themselves. People had learned every passage and access tunnel through years of covert exploration. "Captain Chun, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez. Came a transmission on the prisoner communication frequency. Laboratory Complex 7 is secure. 237 coalition personnel eliminated, 0 human casualties. We have control of all critical systems in this section." Chin smiled grimly. The prisoners had been busy during the 12 hours since the human fleet had arrived. Reports were coming in from across the station. Coalition forces overwhelmed not just by attacking Marines, but by their own test subjects, who had spent years preparing for exactly this opportunity. "Acknowledged, Doctor. What's the prisoner count in your section?" 43,000 confirmed alive. Medical condition varies, but most are ambulatory. We've identified approximately 1,500 individuals requiring immediate medical evacuation. 43,000. Chun did the arithmetic automatically. Comparing those numbers against intelligence estimates of total human prisoners brought to the station over the past decade and a half. The discrepancy was significant and telling. "Doctor, what happened to the others?" A long pause. "Research complications, Captain. Coalition science required fresh subjects on a regular basis." Chin closed her eyes briefly, feeling the familiar rage building in her chest like a physical presence. Research complications. Clinical terminology for what her enemies would probably call murder, if they bothered to apply moral frameworks to their treatment of human subjects. "Understood. Begin preparation for evacuation. Transport ships will dock at your section within 6 hours. Captain," Elena's voice carried to the communication channel with an odd undertone. "There's something you need to see. Something the Coalition has been working on that goes beyond simple behavioral research." Chin altered her route, leading her squad toward Laboratory Complex 7 through passages that showed increasing signs of recent combat. Bodies of Coalition security forces lay scattered across intersections, their weapons and equipment stripped by prisoners who had finally been given the chance to fight back. She found Dr. Elena Vasquez in the complex's central command center, a gray-haired woman whose eyes held a particular hardness that came from years of surviving impossible circumstances. Around her, dozens of former prisoners worked at computer terminals, downloading research data and preparing facility systems for evacuation procedures. "Captain," Elena said without preamble, "you need to see what they've discovered." She led Chun to a secure laboratory deep within the complex, past chambers that still reeked of medical procedures and human suffering. The room beyond the final security door contained banks of cryogenic storage units, their status displays showing thousands of individual samples maintained at near absolute zero. Genetic material, Elena explained, taken from every prisoner who passed through this facility over the past 15 years. But not just samples, complete genetic profiles, psychological evaluations, behavioral analyses. They've been building something. Chen studied the storage units with growing unease. Building what? A database. Everything that makes us human, cataloged and indexed for analysis. They know how we think, how we adapt, how we respond to stress and trauma. They've mapped our species down to the genetic level. To what end? Elena activated a wall display, showing research files had been hidden in the most secure sections of the station's computer networks. Project Genesis, she read from the primary document. Objective: development of targeted biological agents designed to eliminate human adaptive capabilities while preserving basic physiological functions. Chun felt her blood turn cold as she read through the research summary. The coalition hadn't just been studying.